The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you for joining me again this week. I am posting this in the middle of my stated vacation time. What is going on? Chris, what are you doing? Well, let me explain really quickly because this is a little bit of a bonus, but not really, because I meant to get this interview done last week and I got sick as a dog and it was horrible and I was out of commission for days and I felt really bad about that because I really wanted to get this out there. So we are, now that I am better, we are recording this interview today and I am posting it this weekend, despite the fact that I'm taking November off. So you're welcome. All right. So as we're going to get started today, this is an interview with a former Scientologist. And this is Julie McKernan. Welcome, Julie, to my show.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're here and I'm glad you decided to do this because it's always good to get our stories out there. You and I have been in touch for some time now, and it's been going great. And, you know, you've been recovering from Scientology and you were involved with it for a long time. And so I thought, since there's so much for us to talk about, and because we have a lot in common in our Scientology experience in terms of some of our experiences, but also our interest in the tech and being like really interested in wanting to know and figure things out. And, you know, one of the things that that's interesting about cults is that they offer answers and solutions for people, but you could say in Scientology that those answers or that concept is sort of taken to, you know, astro levels. It is sort of on steroids compared to other cults. There is this tremendous body of knowledge that makes up Scientology's dogma. And it's not just Xenu beliefs and there's aliens. It's technical procedures. It's methods. This is how you do this or this or this. This is how you fix somebody who is crying and upset in front of you. This is how you deal with a child. This is how you teach somebody something. This is how you wash a window. I mean, there are a lot of different things in Scientology. And so we have interest we had a lot of interest in learning about that stuff. As part of our journey on this whole thing. I don't know. What do you think about me saying that?
I think you're absolutely spot on. Even before I was aware that I was a Scientologist, even as a born-in, even before I knew of the concept, I had this idea that there's some knowledge there that I don't know, and I was an investigator. I want to know how things work, how to pick things apart. And for me, as a kid, at a very early age, I felt, or I was told, we've got the answers. Like how to do anything, how to brush your teeth, how to teach your kids, how to study. You name it. It was presented to me that the answers are all right here. All you have to do is keep going, keep learning, keep studying. So yes, that was very much a part of my early life.
Yeah. And it's interesting how again, another thing you and I have in common is that we were raised in Scientology by very committed parents. And right. And so being given those answers early on, it's not really that much of a mystery. A lot of people have these questions about how is it that people get raised in organized religion, Scientology, cults, whatever, and are so incurious about the world. And it's not that we were not curious about the world. It's that we thought we were in the place where we had all the answers for that curiosity, you know?
Exactly right. I mean, it was a comforting thing. It felt like an emotional need was fulfilled by feeling like, oh, well, my parents know, or L. Ron Hubbard knows the answer to all my questions. And so I never looked outside that scope.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I think that kind of informs your life journey, um, as to how everything rolled out. And that's what we intend to cover today. Is I just kind of wanted to set the stage a little bit here. But what we're going to do is we're going to tell Julie's story, and we'll probably do some future episodes where we might get into, I say might and maybe, I'm 100% sure we're going to, but I'm just saying that we're going to do some other episodes in the future after we cover Julie's basic story here, where we can get into, some of the nitty gritty details of things. But I thought we might start by presenting your basic, life history, so to speak.
Absolutely. Okay.
All right. So I laugh only because there's this whole life history form in Scientology that
Oh, geez. Okay.
does the same thing, right?
We won't go there yet.
Yeah, we won't go there yet. So, all right. So let's go ahead and dive into this and start from the get-go. How were you brought into this Scientology world that you were born into, and how did life start for you that way, and what was the situation with your folks?
Okay. I was born in Boston in 1969. Both of my parents were staff members at what was the beginnings of the Boston Org. My mother had founded it after having been on the Apollo with Hubbard in the early stages of the Sea Org.
Okay, mother founded Boston Org?
Correct.
Wow, so that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, started a whole Scientology church in Boston.
Yes, she was sent from Dallas. It's kind of a strange, twisted story, but she was originally in Dallas, Texas. Then she went on to the Apollo, worked with L. Ron Hubbard, and then was granted permission to leave the Sea Org, if you can believe that, in written form by Mr. Hubbard. She wanted to go back to Dallas, and then she was fired off meaning she was sent off to start a new organization in Boston. And so there she was, and she was the senior case supervisor, which is the person who oversees the overall auditing or counseling of all the members that come in. So she founded the org, and then she became the senior CS. And I was born shortly after. Case director, yeah, case supervisor.
Right. She was holding the senior technical position rather than the senior administrative position. She wasn't actually running the entire church.
No.
And that's interesting as the person who founded this. So was it her and your dad, or how did this, who was she?
No, my father grew up in Rhode Island, and he met her on a whim, probably out on the sidewalk with a personality test or something like that. And actually, the story is kind of cute. My father was a student at MIT, physics major. And my mother is working as the senior case supervisor of now her founded Boston Org. He came in with a book of Nietzsche, a philosopher. And he came in and said, "Hey, would you read my book of Nietzsche?" And she says, "Yeah, as long as you read Dianetics." And so they traded books.
I see.
My mother put that book right in the drawer of her desk, and my dad became on staff and then quickly sent off to get his Class 8 training, a high training in Scientology for auditor training. So he went off to Los Angeles before I was even born. I was born without him being present.
Oh, okay. Okay. So he goes off to LA and unbeknownst or beknownst that you were gestating.
Beknownst.
Okay,
Beknownst.
good. Okay, good.
But my mom was already at class 8.
Right. And class 8 is a lot of training, especially,
It is. It is
back
indeed.
then. It's a
And I
lot.
don't want to, I don't want to confuse people. Class 8 is just a high level of counseling training within Scientology. That's all that
Correct.
means.
Yeah. We
But it
could,
is a high level.
yeah, we could simply put it as he was shipped off to grad school. Like it was like that level of oddity.
That's about right. Yeah, he was shipped off. I was born. He wasn't there. And I literally grew up in the senior CS office in a little basket next to my mom's desk.
Right. Right. I saw many babies in many orgs in that exact same circumstance. Yeah. And then he comes back. You're being raised as basically a staff baby in Boston.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Cool. Mm-hmm. And what was that like? How long did that go on for? And what do you? I mean, did this? How long were your parents on staff? I guess I should ask.
Well, it's a bit of a wild story.
Oh, proceed.
It is a bit of a wild story. Both of my parents were what I would call hippies without the drugs. They were very free spirited. My father was very much into the para Scientology, ooh, what mind powers can we find? My mother was the hardcore trained, head on kind of gal, having worked with Hubbard before as well. And can I back up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So my mother found Scientology in, I believe, 1955, let's say, about then. Maybe a little bit later. I can't be sure. She joined staff in Dallas, Texas. Then she traveled to St. Hill with a husband that was not my father and her young son at the time on a cargo ship to go to St. Hill, had to lie to get into the country because at that point they were under scrutiny as to why are you here? So she went to St. Hill. Excuse me. She studied at St. Hill.
Do you remember about what year that was that she went to St. Hill?
That would be probably 66, 67. My best guess. I'd have to confirm with her.
Okay.
And right around then, she was doing the clearing course, what they called the clearing course. So she had already done quite a bit of Scientology in Dallas. And a lot of folks, because L. Ron Hubbard was going to England, everyone wanted to follow him there, to listen to him, to be with him, to understand his message, so to speak. So she got on a cargo ship with her then husband and her young boy, son, and traveled all the way to England. Went on course at St. Hill. In the I think it was 67, in the fall of 67, I believe, there was what they called the Sea Project. It was kind of like a secret thing that was going on. Mm-hmm. It could have been early 68, but L. Ron Hubbard had to leave the country.
Actually, it was 66 when Hubbard started packing up his bags, and 66 is that whole year is the Sea Project.
Okay, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. But my mother was there at St. Hill at the time, and it was sort of like a secret invitation to join this project that, if you want to hang with a leader, you got to come with us. So she ended up leaving or sending her then husband back with her son to Dallas on some boat, I guess, and then ditching off to Morocco or Spain or wherever the heck they picked that boat up. I think it was England to begin with, on the Apollo.
Hmm.
And then she spent only, I would say, about 6 months on that vessel, but she was also on the mission into time, which is a crazy experience. And there's a book about it that you can no longer find in print for various reasons. But she was chasing a dream. She was chasing this idea that, wow, I can change the world. I can save the world. So I don't fault her for all her involvement whatsoever. So anyway, she finished off her.
If I might ask there, when she shipped her first husband and son off back to Dallas, was she leaving them? Was the intention that this is over now and I'm going to do the Sea Org thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So this was an understood, we're done. And
yes,
what she was committing to.
He was involved at the time. And again, Chris, I don't want to bring up any names or cause any trouble for anybody.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand the sequence of judging her at all for this. It's what happened.
Yes, that's what happened. Yeah. What I don't necessarily believe it's for everyone, but there are many, many people, once they get so heavily invested, the thought of deserting a husband, a kid, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
They're on to something bigger and better.
That's right.
That he felt at the time.
That's right. Well, I'll tell you, in terms of personal judgment or whatever, I mean, the most revered Scientologist I know of is not actually L. Ron Hubbard. It's Yvonne Jen.
Yvonne?
Yeah, Yvonne.
Oh, my gosh. My mother knew her quite well on the Apollo.
Well, she is revered. That's the only word I can use, because every single time her name comes up from anybody who ever knew her,
nobody has a bad word to say.
No one. And yet, Yvonne absolutely abandoned her kids. Yes. Like it's not even an arguable point. She did. Right. And she's yet considered one of the most, kindest, compassionate, empathetic Scientologists that ever lived. So people are complicated is the point.
Yeah, that is a very good point. And my mom did know Yvonne, loves her, like you say. Everybody loved her. I find that we have to go back to the dynamics of what does indoctrination do to a person, or how can it change a person from their natural nature? And it's quite frightening, to be honest. Like, how do you divorce your husband and send a kid back? How do you do these things? It's because the carrot or the gold or the goal is so prominent that you lose your own sense of morality. You truly do. I don't harbor any hard feelings against my mom for that at all.
Yep. Just part of the story.
But I get it. It's part of the story. Exactly.
That's right. Yeah.
And she had some interesting involvements with Hubbard.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were pretty cool, according to her. Kind of adventurous. I mean, imagine yourself, you're in your late 20s and you're sailing around the Mediterranean. I mean, that sounds pretty cool.
It's an adventure.
Oh, yeah. It was definitely an adventure. But
yeah, literally on the high seas.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. It's not even like some figurative,
it was the high seas.
We're on the high seas. We are mission, just to clarify as well, since we didn't really get into it and we're not going to go super detailed on this, but Mission into Time was an effort by L. Ron Hubbard to get his newly minted Sea Org members to confirm through on the ground archaeological digs to dig up what L. Ron Hubbard remembered from his past lives from centuries ago, having lived, he claimed, as a as a person in the Mediterranean area. And so that's what that was about, was people literally running around off the coast of various countries, digging stuff up for Hubbard and confirming his past life memories. And that's what that was all about. So again, for a wide-eyed, interested, this is all real and true, and we're going to save the world with this, this is big. This is like the big adventure for her. So anyway, I just kind of put that whole thing in perspective a little bit,
Thank you very much for that. Yes, it's very true. My mom talks about how they actually had to break the law in a couple of countries in the middle of the night to get through fences, to start digging, to look for like hidden gold or some lost fortress or something like that.
That's right. That's right. Hubbard had also tried to pull the same thing down in Rhodesia in South Africa too.
Oh yeah. Yes, it was quite the eye opener for me to learn that I'm not stupid or crazy because my mom wasn't stupid or crazy either. Nope. And that was a big, like, full circle moment for me to understand that, okay, Mom, I get it. I probably would have been jazzed about that life too at the time. But once it came many, many years later, but once she came to realize all those lies that she felt a part of, she regretted it. But yet, what can you do? You can't go back and change time. So
that's right. Exactly.
She was integral in getting me out.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Well, we will definitely get to that part. Now, coming back to before you were even around, Mom, chasing up, Hubbard's tall tales out in the Mediterranean and stuff,
digging up gold that isn't there.
Right. So she goes from that to wanting to leave the Sea Org at some point to get shipped off to Boston to start the Church of Scientology there and be the senior technical person there.
Correct.
Do you know what it was that caused that? I don't think I want to be here anymore, from the adventure to the, this isn't really what I want to be doing?
I don't know the exact answer to that.
Okay.
I know that there were, she became the supercargo on the ship for a while there. And she had dealings with not only Hubbard on a daily basis. Oh, actually, that does remind me. Her and another gal, as during that time period, Hubbard was researching different auditing techniques, and we're coming up on the OT levels, operating thetan levels in that era. And so he would go into his office and write things down and then shoot them out to my mom or the other gal, and they would type it up and distribute it around the ship. And so that became like the new thing. This is it. This is how we're going to reach the epiphany. This is how this is the next new greatest breakthrough. So my mother would distribute those around. And I think that, I know that in conversations, she would tell me how she saw that it's just not working.
Right.
It's just not producing the promise that I came here for.
It's interesting that, and worth commenting on, that throughout all of the 1950s and 1960s, Hubbard's pattern was that it was over-promising. Okay, we've got it. This is it. Every month, practically, every couple months, there would be some big new announcement. And you can go back through the lectures and stuff and see this. This isn't just my opinion. It's right there. And it's a pattern that he would use of keeping people on the hook, right? Keep them around by promising the next big thing. Oh my God, this is it. We totally got it. Oh no, this is it. Oh no, actually, no, this is it right here.
I figured it out.
Yeah, I figured this one out, right? And this would happen over and over and over again. And it's one of the reasons why you'll see, if you track with Hubbard and his movements, you'll see an ever-changing group of people around him, empowering him and acting as his flying monkeys, right? His inner circle, his entourage, are all off of these promises until, like you just mentioned, right? Which made me think of this, until it stopped working. Until, here's another promise, and guess what? They're not. It's just a string of broken promise. Oh, I see what's going on here.
Yeah.
Not that she necessarily woke up all the way at that point, but it starts small, right? It's not always just, a big deal.
So very correct. I believe that based on her stories that she just saw, and just like you're talking about, it would literally be she's in her bunk and a piece of paper comes flying under the door, and it's the next process to run that next day. And so it's all brand new, and it's, oh gosh, I found it. This is the new thing. You got to run it in the morning on your pre-clear, your person you're dealing with. And over time, it just wasn't working, and people are getting sick. People are leaving. People are ditching the boat. People are packing their bags in the middle of the night and like sneaking off the ship. She's like, I'm out of here. I'm done. Like, it's not, this part of it is not working. So she didn't leave entirely, but she wanted to go back to Dallas. She wanted to go back to that staff situation and also return to Boston to just make sure everything's okay. Like whatever that was on the boat was kind of like a little on the freaky side. So
right.
Like, I'm out of here.
Got it.
I'm out of here.
All right. So I just got curious about your mom and her story for a second.
She has great stories.
I'll bet she does. So, I imagine founding Boston, Oregon, being around during that time. Boston has a particular significance in Scientology, which we do not need to get into today. We can maybe cover it in a future thing, but it's just Boston does have significance in Scientology. Yep. So
I know.
And her setting that up is a few years later. A whole lot of things happened in Boston. So
I know. I do know about it. I was there. Yeah. I was a baby, but I was there.
Well, okay. So let's get into that then. So let's get back to you, and you were there, and you were born, and you were sitting in a manger by the CS desk. What are your earliest memories of this life and Scientology and your mom and dad and that kind of stuff?
Okay, I knew you were going to ask that question. I pondered it almost all day long. I was like, what? My earliest memories were things like a locational assist. That's where you point. If I was upset as a baby, and I do have these memories, a little bit sketchy, but they're there. Oh, you're upset, little honey? Pick you up and, oh, look at the light switch. Oh, good. Look at the wall. Okay, good. Look at this. So instantly, but I never saw any of my friends and their parents have anything like that happening in their homes. Now, by this time, my parents left staff in Boston 6 months after I was born. They bought a sailboat and sailed all the way down through the intracoastal and out to the Bahamas, where my brother was born. So I basically grew up on a sailboat after 6 months years old.
Oh, wow. So you really... Wow. So you weren't around in Boston for that long before you're having your own ship-bound adventure.
And unbelievable. I don't remember this, but unbelievably, it's actually true. There was a registrar, a Scientology staff member, Sea Org member, that came to the Bahamas, to St. Thomas, to hunt my parents down, not just to get them back. My mother had just given birth to my younger brother at the time, but they still wanted her back, and my dad as well, because they were both highly trained auditors. So they wanted him to get back to the States and get back on lines and get back in the church and get back on staff.
Oh, okay, not back in the Sea Org, but back on staff.
Correct.
God. Okay, yeah. Okay, that would make more sense with the two kids.
Yeah.
This is what, 1971 or something? You're about a year old?
About that. Yeah, about that. So we're down in the Bahamas. The only awareness that I had about Scientology was just what my parents did and said. I didn't know how to read yet. But once we came back to the States, I'll never forget it. One of the first books I read was I think it was called the Dianetics Picture Book. It was a big fold out book. And I think there was a Scientology picture book.
There was. Yep. There were one of them.
Yes. So we had those in the house. And that was one of the first things I ever read in my whole life. So then I started to connect the dots of, oh, that's why you tell me to look at this, look at that, look at that, look at that. And there was always this, at least on my father's side especially, this what I call para-Scientology. It's actually a term.
Mm-hmm.
It means next to, para, right? My dad was being a physicist in college. He always had this like metaphysical viewpoint about Scientology. So when I learned about the basic concepts, my father would take me aside and say, okay, now use the force.
How did he do that? What does that mean exactly?
I know it sounds crazy.
What my mom and I did, but what did you guys get up to?
Okay. I don't know the names of them. This is back in the late 60s, right? Or early 70s, mid 70s now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're a young class practicing OT powers, yeah, you must have been 4 or 5 or something, 3 or 4.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And there was a set of flashcards that were used with, what was his name? I don't know, some Swedish guy. Geary.
These are the psychic flashcards, right?
Yes, like the triangle, the waves, the square.
Yeah, they show these at the beginning of the film Ghostbusters. Bill Murray is using.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Those cards, they're blank on one side and they have a symbol that the person can't see, and they're supposed to guess what the symbol.
Right. Michelle, whatever his name was, the psychic guy. It was big in that era. Mm-hmm. That was kind of Michelle Gurry or whatever. I'm sorry.
Uri Geller.
Yes, thank you, Uri Geller.
And and there was some there. This was a time period,
quite a few, and there was a tie-in with Scientology at that point.
Yeah, there was. This was a time period when Scientology was actually at the public level. They didn't, like on the raw street, they didn't say, hey, come in and learn psychic powers. But very quickly, after a person got involved in Scientology in the 60s and 70s, those conversations could happen. There was a lot of interest in that stuff.
Yes. So that was a big thing in my household. My father had a set of the cards. And I mean, in Scientological terms, you could say, what a squirrel.
They would now. They would now.
Totally true. I didn't know it at the time. I was only 6 or 7 years old. That's right. He used to drill me on the flashcards. He'd hold them up, and I was supposed to get out of my body, go around and read the card and tell him what it was.
Yep.
So I got drilled on all kinds of that stuff quite often. And if I got a good score, it was like, yay, extra bacon for you.
Technically it's called remote viewing.
Right.
And that's the psychic practice. It is, as far as I'm concerned, it's complete poppycock. Many times, let me stress this. many times. Experiments have been done under actual scientific conditions to test this ability in people who claim to have it, and it has never ever come up in any legit scientific study that there's anything to this. But there are so many pseudoscientific quote unquote studies that people will cite or think are real, and this is why this thing just continues to have legs. People really want to believe this stuff. Just like they wanted to believe in telepathy and ESP and stuff like that, which is my mom and I would sort of play at, is trying to read each other's thoughts, Yes. So I grew up the same kind of fascination, and even my parents encouraging this belief. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that was sort of, it was a weird mixture of, okay, there's this written stuff that I need to know about myself and about life that's written down on pages, but yet there's this like weird game that we do at the same time. And as a young child, it was hard to combine those things. Like, wait, is it the written stuff or is it the flashcards? Like, they don't go together. However, so throughout life, I just further and further, I just admired my parents so much, particularly my mom. I wanted to know everything she knew. And once I found out how much she knew about Scientology, I was like, oh, I'm going to learn everything about Scientology because I want to be like she is. And my dad was like the fun one. He was the gamey Star Wars guy with the psychic cards, but he was great. But I was like, wow, I got the perfect parents. And then, of course, later on in life, through auditing, I decided that, I chose them. Like I've lived it. I picked my parents. And so then there comes that weird fallacy of that, I chose my parents.
It's a big deal in Scientology.
It is a big deal.
In fact, you could say it's the sort of central theme of what Scientology offers to people as sort of the carrot on the stick that they're dangling in front of you.
Yes.
The basic concept of what they're offering you is being at cause.
Yep.
Being in the driver's seat of your life, being the one who's in charge and making the decisions that affect your life. Other people, other things. No. You're the one in charge. And this theme it runs through all the writings, all the lectures, everything. It's just present everywhere. And it manifests in really interesting and strange and twisted ways, like convincing a child that before they even had this body, they, chose their parent. That there was a causative. You caused that to happen. Is my point, right? And it's a twisted, weird thing. It becomes obsessive in Scientology.
Yes, it does become obsessive, and it is damaging. Yeah. It can feel empowering at times because you're like, yes, I made that happen. But then when something bad happens, what did I do to cause that?
That's right.
And it starts out small. Like as a little kid, I fell down and bruised my knee. I would instantly pop up from that and go, what did I do to make that? What did I do to make that happen?
That's right.
And then it starts the wheel in your mind for the rest of your life, which continued until 3 years ago, where anything bad that happened in my life, definitely my fault. What did I do to cause that to happen? And then let's go into like the concept of responsibility. I was taught that from such an early age.
Me too.
And responsibility is not a bad word, but it can be made into one.
Exactly. To be clear about answering this question, because I realize from an outsider perspective, there's some subtext here that maybe we might want to fill in.
Sorry.
somebody who might be listening in on, the Scientology experience for the first time, right? When we say, what did I do to cause this? We don't, and you fell down. We don't mean, oh, you stumbled on a crack on the sidewalk.
No,
You twisted your ankle or something. It's that you did some wrong, unethical, bad thing prior to this accident happening. And this is kind of you enforcing your own karmic discipline or something.
Precisely right.
Yeah.
Precisely right. It's not what did I do. It's funny. I forget to the correct full definition of that. It's more like what did I do wrong?
Exactly, because there's constant self-judgment in Scientology, and you can see how it can be instilled in a child very early on. Mm-hmm. It's not the devil that made you do it. It's not the demon on your shoulder. It's not the impure thoughts. It's you actually in the real world did something.
Yes, and it gets even weirder, as you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know to what audience, how broad this is going to go. But as you know, Chris, once you get really into the business of Scientology, you're going to find out what past life thing did you do. And it's a whole new world. And that's just something in Scientology. There's past life. You've been living forever. You're going to live forever. Your actions and your personas and all your past lives, trillions of years back and forever for ahead, that's who you are. So when you say, oh, what did I do? I mean, you could have like smacked a kid on the knee in 1660 in Britain.
Exactly.
It could be anything.
Exactly.
And that's the kind of stuff that you end up trying to uncover to understand why you got pneumonia or why you broke your ankle, whatever it is.
That's
and
right.
It's that constant, and even if you're not sitting down with a Scientology auditor, at least for me, I would always go, okay, what do you think you did? I would run it on myself a little bit, like try to figure
a little bit.
out.
Oh, we were indoctrinated to do exactly that.
That's what you do.
That's yeah. Otherwise, you don't have control going on, right? Because this is so crucial to understand how this little subtle thing works, even on a child. Because once you instill it, once you install this idea that this is how things are, you have to. It makes life a lot easier for predators and authoritarian types and cult leaders when they can create a mechanism that gets you policing yourself.
Exactly.
And that's what this is, right? It's a constant self-indulgent sort of, what did I do? What did I do? What did I do? It constantly puts your attention inwards and focuses inwards. And that's not an accident. I don't like too heavy-handed on this, but these are the kind of subtle control mechanisms that even work on children that will set you up for a lifetime of failure.
Yes. And I would add to that one point, at least for me, was that being a fan of, fantasy and Star Trek and Star Wars and all that kind of thing. I mean, who wasn't at the time? But this thought of, oh, wow, if I can contact that, like it made, even though I was introverting and wondering what I did wrong, like the thought of, oh, yeah, I crashed a spaceship into Mars. Oh, yeah, cool. Like there's the sci-fi stuff mixed in there a little bit.
That's right.
Like if you can remember past lives, well, then shucks, you could have been running a planet, as they say.
Exactly.
Or, supervising stormtroopers. So then this part of me goes, ooh, well, it wasn't that bad because that was really cool. That's a 6-year-old, 7-year-old thinking, right?
Absolutely. Do you remember in the 70s, this book was much more prominent than it's off the shelves now, just like the Mission into Time. Do you remember Have You Lived Before This Life?
Oh, of course. Totally.
With the picture of the skeleton in the graveyard and stuff, right? It was a little freaky, right?
Totally. I read it 3 times.
Okay, yeah, I read through a bunch of those stories when I was a kid.
And that's gravitating when you're a kid, especially because you're hooked on like the Narnia series or like all this cool sci-fi stuff. So that, especially as a kid, like if you're a grown-up, not every grown-up, but you might go, that's kind of weird. But as a kid, you just want to soak it up like a sponge. So I read all that stuff many, many times over, and I found it thrilling to imagine, oh, yeah, I was a princess in Spain. Or, yeah, I was a boat captain. I was a Viking. Things like that are very enticing for a young person's mind as they grow up.
So. Very much so.
And I think I do believe you that and I hate to say it, but I believe it was contrived, like purposely planned to do that for young people.
I don't disagree at all. I think the entire thing is a setup. The one thing I'd like to ask you about, because I remember as a kid, reading Have You Lived Before This Life, which is basically a book of anecdotes about stories that people told in their auditing sessions and are detailed in this book from stuff in the past lives. And there's, all kinds of weird robots and spaceships and all kinds of crazy stories.
Yeah.
I always differentiated in my mind, and I wanted to ask you what you did. Mm-hmm. I knew Star Wars and Star Trek were TV shows, movies, that they were not real. I never had any idea that those were real things, right?
Correct.
I was, as you mentioned, enticed, excited, intrigued by the fact that here was a book, this Have You Lived Before This Life, and the other materials in Scientology, and what people would be talking about right in front of you.
Yeah.
Times that was the real stuff.
Right. Yeah, totally.
True, right?
Same here. In fact, I had the idea that like Star Trek and Star Wars and whatever, all those movies and shows and stuff, those were people that didn't quite understand the reality of the whole trip.
That's right. Did they have... Let me ask you about this. Did they have paintings? Because in Pasadena, I grew up in Pasadena Mission, which is now an org, right, in California. And and I grew up in an area where Scientology was absolutely booming. I mean, there were lots of people involved in Scientology in Los Angeles in the 1970s.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things you could find then, which you will not find now anywhere in Scientology, are paintings that were done by Scientology artists of spaceships with a Sea Org logo on it.
Whoa.
Flying through space.
Okay.
13. Did you ever see anything like that as a kid?
Yeah. I do recall that.
It just lended more.
Absolutely. It was a thing. It
was like the reality of it. This is our future. This is what, because I asked, what is that? And that's going off to Target 2 is what that is, right? And I'm 9 years old. I don't know what the hell Target 2 is, But, yeah, but this is our normal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, our growing up situations were different, but very similar, because I totally equated with that. Whenever I saw stars or a spaceship, I thought, and then, gosh, if you put a Sea Org symbol on that, I'm like, that's us. Yeah, I'm all about it. It's a very strange marketing thing, but it worked for a child.
It worked like gangbusters, and on adults and kids. Again,
on both.
This was the flavor of Scientology. It's different now in terms of how it markets itself and presents itself, but it was way, spiritual and astro and this and that. Um, okay, well, let's get back to your narrative because I just kind of totally wandered off there for a second
It's all
on the
good. It's
cultural
all good.
stuff
I love
there.
it.
But okay, so so your parents get recovered or whatever. What was the 70s like for you? Were you in Dallas, you said?
Oh,
In
yeah. Well, okay, I'll start from there.
Yeah.
We got back from the Bahamas. We moved back to Dallas, I believe. Again, I'm a very young kid. Then I think we spent some time in LA. I moved all over the country. We never lived more than probably 2.5 years in any one location.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Zigzagging from Los Angeles, Texas, Florida, Illinois, Connecticut, Massachusetts, back to Florida, back to Texas, up to Maine. So I was constantly on the move. And it
What were your
wasn't,
parents doing for work?
my father was, he was doing various things, but primarily he was selling real estate. But not that he owned it. He was just a salesperson for real estate. And so we would go wherever sales were looking hot.
Okay. That's why
And
the thing.
yeah, so that therefore the bing, 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 like ping pong.
Got it.
And my mother was being a mom to my two brothers and I. She worked on and off, but nothing major. So she was always up for the move. And my dad was looking for the next hot spot to sell. So that's why we ended up moving around so much. Quite a
Okay,
bit.
cool.
A
When
lot.
you mentioned, if I might ask, you mentioned two brothers and you.
Correct.
Were those your biological brother and then your step brother or
Two
half
younger
brother?
biological brothers.
Okay. And then did she ever get custody of the first one or that he stayed with the dad?
He stayed with dad.
Got it. Okay, just wanted to make sure I had
That's cool.
all the family there. Okay, cool. So growing up, kicking around, moving around the states,
And
jumping
at that,
schools.
I have to interject this.
Yeah.
During all those years, up until about 1982, they were not on lines. They were not involved in Scientology. We just had it in the house. In fact, I'll never forget looking in the back of one of the books that I was reading, because I was told to read them at home. I never knew there was such a thing as an org. I thought it was all in books. I didn't even know about an org until
Right.
I was about 11. I was like, wait a second. Then I realized, oh my gosh, you guys are, then it kind of like came together. Like you guys left and you're kind of doing your own thing. And yet you're trying to impinge it on us as kids, which they did, but in their own way. But I didn't know about organizations, sorry.
Right. The churches.
Formal organizations, yes.
Yeah. You were aware of the subject of it and the
Totally.
fact that there were books about it, but you didn't know people were going down and doing classes and stuff like that.
Totally. Yeah, I had no clue. I didn't realize it was.
How'd you get clued in on that? What happened?
Well, I got in trouble for doing something in middle school. And of course, I had to do a little project around the house to make up for it. And meanwhile, cleaning out this dresser, I found a pamphlet for a place called Delphi, Delphi Academy in Oregon. We were living in Maine at the time. And I actually always was a very good student. I loved studying. I made good grades, but I just love study. I love learning. So I'm flipping through all these pamphlets and I came across this picture of this beautiful school in Oregon with like a horse trail and all this stuff. And I went to my mom and I said, Mom, I cleaned this up. I did this. I did that. I fed the horse. I did like, am I good now? And she said, Yeah, you're fine. I said, Well, can we talk about this school? Because it looks really interesting to me. She said, Yeah, sure, we can talk about it. And so I sat my mom and dad down, and they agreed to let me go there for 6 weeks in 1982 during the summer, which was a big deal. And I flew by myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, to me, it was not that big a deal. It's just travel. But at 12 years old, I flew across from Maine to Oregon. I spent 6 weeks there. I actually fell in love with the place. I'm not going to lie.
It is a beautiful place. And if you,
beautiful place.
I mean, there's horses, there's wood. It's large. It's a large property. It's up on a hill. The views are incredible. I've been there a couple of times.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah, it's something else up there.
Yeah, it's great. So I kind of fell in love with it. I made friends with a couple of girls, slept in the dorm, did that whole thing. I only had brothers, remind you. So for me to like hang out with girls was like, yay. So I kind of fell in love with it. And then when I returned home after that summer, I asked if I could get back there. I want to go there to school. And somehow my parents worked it out financially.
Let me ask you a little bit more about that 6-week thing before we proceed.
Yeah.
Because then, much more so than now, the fact that it was a Scientology based school was very much in your face. And I'm wondering how much did that affect your decision to want to be there or be part of it? Or was that a factor at all? Or was it just the social and the landscape and that kind of stuff?
It was very much a factor for me.
In what way?
I will never forget, very early, I think I was there 3 days. I knew that there was Scientology around. And in fact, that's one of the reasons I wanted to be there. Like, I want to know more. So even though that wasn't predominantly placed into the promotional materials, I knew it was there. So I was like, I want to go there and check it out. So
okay. To be clear, it wasn't the case that you're 12 years old, you're having a big adventure. Ooh, horses. Ooh, friends. Okay, this is what Scientology was part of the decision-making process.
Absolutely, 100%.
Good. Just want to make sure we're clear on all of.
Even at that young age, I had that drive.
What was it about Scientology at 12 years old that was appealing to you, or that you were interested in? Was it the para stuff, the ESP stuff, or was it something else?
No, it was wow. I mean, how to vocalize it, especially going back to 12 years old. It was more like there are secrets to life that are there, and I want to know them. That's how I felt. Like, there are secrets to life. So that meant, I guess if I look back on it, that somehow my current life, I had a great childhood. I think. I mean, it was not bad at all. But I just felt like there was always something secret, something like a gold nugget, something that I did not know that I could easily learn if I just went there and studied and found it.
Right.
Or dig deep enough. There's something about, I mean, you're very learned on things, like maybe it was an emotional need.
Well, mystery and unanswered questions is itself a driver, and that's
it was like that.
I felt that. I can relate because my dad wasn't Mr. Parascientology necessarily like yours was. My mom was more like that, but my dad was the one who would tease me all through my childhood. I've commented on this before about, the space opera stuff. Mm-hmm. And about, he would tell me, he would drop these little morsels of these crumbs of intriguing knowledge that I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere else. Nobody at school knew about it. None of my friends knew about this. But my dad would say things to me like, there are implant stations on Mars.
Oh, sure.
And I'd be like, what? What does that mean? You know, oh, spaceships and civilization stuff. Like there's things that somebody's built on Mars.
Yes.
That's what that communicated to me, right? I didn't know what an implant station was, but I knew what Mars was. And
Yes.
I knew we hadn't gone there yet. And so for him to have this knowledge and somehow communicate this to me, or that things were going on in Venus, or, hey, Dad, how come the center of the galaxy is so bright? Because there's a lot going on there.
Oh gosh.
Nudge, wink, wink, right?
Yeah.
In a way, I felt like my dad was kind of like Calvin and Hobbes' dad. You know what I mean? He would just tell me these things, but he wasn't trying to mess with me. He believed it too. So that was what kind of hooked me early on for me, and that's why I was curious what had hooked you, because I believe that it's that thing that will hook us, whereas some Scientology kids grow up and they're not really that interested, and they don't get hooked, you know. And I don't know that it's the same hook for everybody, but I think that when it does catch with us, it's something like that. We find something as a kid that is intriguing, or it's going to answer questions we can't get answered anywhere else, or it could be emotional needs as well. It could be, you know, a lot of different things that'll hook a person. But I always look for, well, what was it? Because I know there's going to be something there. Otherwise, why would you have stuck with it? You know?
Very, 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 very good question. And when I say I felt like there were secrets, it's very interesting that you point out that your father put those things to you in little morsels or nuggets thrown out there. I felt the same growing up. Both from my mother was the staunch, like, if you want to talk confront, she'd scare the hell out of you. But I don't mean in a mean way. She could just look at you, like, very quiet, very reserved. My father was the fun guy, but he had all these, like, he would toss out these things like you're saying, like, oh yeah, the implant stations on Mars, or, oh, don't you remember Saturn? Come on, get with it, kid. Like, wild things. And for a kid, I was like, wow, he knows about this stuff. And because my mother was like the wise owl, very wise, but she didn't say much about stuff, but she was super wise. So I'm like, between these two, there's got to be something I'm missing out. And it has to be Scientology, because that's the only thing I can think of that would make sense as to why she's super smart and you're super cool, wacky, wow, cool, smart. But it was that as a kid trying to figure out, what is it that I should know that you guys know, but you can't tell me. You can't tell me outright. And boy, did that set up the lineup for the whole doing the bridge, because you have to learn for yourself. You know, no, and I'm sorry to spit out the terminology, no verbal tech. Like, you can't tell someone what the technology of Scientology means. You have got to study it for yourself. So that was my mindset, was like, okay, whatever they know, I want to know. And the only way to get there is this.
That's right. That's right.
That's how I felt. And if Delphi was a part of it, then so be it. Let's go. And
that's right. And it's a funny thing, because they have this whole verbal tech thing, which of course we've, you know, discussed on this channel many times, where you're not supposed to be explaining Scientology to each other. But after you're done, after you've started your reading or listening to the lectures or whatever, if you start saying stuff that isn't in compliance with how the group understands it, they're not going to explain it to you, but they're going to browbeat you until they corral
you. You're done. You're toast. Yeah. No interpretation. Exactly. No interpretation.
Nope.
That's right.
So, okay, well, fair enough. So, so you go out to Oregon.
Yeah. So I went away to school.
How long were you there?
Till February of 1986. So I was there 3.5 years.
All right. So you're out there for 3.5 years. What grades or what education period are you covering at this point? 12 years old. So early high school time or high school time?
I graduated when I was 16.
Okay.
And they don't operate on normal grades.
Yeah.
They had two systems. They had levels and they had forms. But at the time that I was there, it was level 4 was a graduate, or form 8, I believe, was a graduate. But they were trying to mesh these two systems together and try to figure out. I was one of the last levels graduates. I graduated level 4 in February of 1986.
Okay.
Now they go to form 8. But
Right.
there's no grades. It doesn't match up to ages. Yeah, so it's
They use
totally
a check
different
sheet system, right?
Oh, totally. Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
So
Yes.
basically, in
It's
science,
self-study. It's self-study with the checklist that you go through. There is involvement in, science lab or drama class or music class or whatever. I mean, they do have a broad range of things you can learn, but they have an interesting way of sneaking in Scientology.
and how do
I
they
did
do
a
that?
bunch of that.
Pray tell, how did they sneak Scientology in?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think the first course I did was called the Learning Book,
Hmm?
which is Scientology's study technology
Hmm?
based on L. Ron Hubbard, and is all L. Ron Hubbard. So that was the
Was
first
this
course I did.
now at the time? I
That was
know
like
it's
1982.
right. These are Delphi materials, though. This is not like they went down to the church and bought a
No,
Scientology book and
no, but they're sanctioned by Applied Scholastics, which is a cover group or a front group
Mhm.
for it's there, but they're licensed to use the materials of L. Ron Hubbard in an educational setting. So they get it okay to print their own curriculum, but a lot of it is based on Scientology.
That's right. That's right. They literally, and I mean this literally. I get to use that word like for real. They literally write L. Ron Hubbard into a secular child version as a textbook.
That's right.
Call it the Learning Book.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a book you'll buy in Scientology, but all the same Scientology principles are in there. So they are not teaching Scientology, and yet that's exactly what they're doing. And they won't have okay to use that book until the Church of Scientology gives them authorization. It's called issue authority, is what they call it in Scientology.
That's right.
And all of the Delphi materials that use Scientology are rewritten that way.
Mm-hmm. That is exactly correct. Yep. So I did that as my first course, I think, ever, real course. And then there's another one called, at Delphi, they call it, or used to call it, the Thinking Book.
Yes, I was hoping you'd cover this one too. Tell me about that one.
Oh my goodness. Well, I believe, and because I'm more auditor trained as opposed to admin trained, I'm not sure if I'm right on this, but I believe this comes from what they call the Data Evaluator series.
Yep,
right?
Data series. That's right.
Okay. So, but this is a course that is delivered to all the students. It's required. The Thinking Book, at least that's what they used to call it.
Mm-hmm. Still do.
Okay. So, look, find a now point. Find where.
It is literally L. Ron Hubbard's. It's L. Ron Hubbard's method of how to think.
Exactly. So that was like when I got started on my first official year. The Learning Book was there, the Thinking Book, which pretty interesting, I guess, but I can find many faults now looking back, big time. So there's that. Oh, there's all of the ethics department. Oh, the ethics book.
Mm-hmm. They got a whole number. L. Ron Hubbard rewritten. That's right.
That's exactly right. So there was the ethics book. I mean, there's quite a bit of it that was instilled into the curriculum, along with, your history and your math and your geography and whatever else. But it was right there, front and center.
Let me ask you a couple questions about this thinking book for a second, just because it might serve to highlight the Scientology influence on the education.
Yeah.
Because you do go to Delphi is a private school that's been around for decades. And it is an accredited institution. People can go there. The degrees or the diploma they get, it's valid.
Valid.
You are educated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody will recognize it. It's not some, diploma mill or something. It's not a college. It's a grade school level thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the thinking book, for example, we don't have to go into a big, huge thing on this, but I summarize it as learning how to scapegoat people. That's how
that's an interesting perspective on it. Yes, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, because at the end, okay, there are steps within this idea of this formula of handling a situation, right? There are these steps. And towards the end of it is find the why. And the why has to be a person. It can't be
somebody.
It has to be a person.
Yep.
So you can't go through all the steps and go, oh, the why is because the weather was bad. No, it's somebody. And then just like you're saying, here you go into attack mode or at least call out mode.
That's right.
Okay, you screwed up. That's why this whole thing's messed up. And
That's
yes, it does teach you to either scapegoat or label another. You're the reason everything's wrong.
Exactly. There can never be a situation using L. Ron Hubbard's system of thinking. And again,
you're right.
There's whole videos on my channel breaking all this down in terms of Hubbard's system of it. But put simply, there is no way to resolve a situation or something non-optimum going on according to Hubbard's system of thinking without finding the why it happened and who that is responsible for it. And this all goes back to what we mentioned earlier, that central theme in Scientology about how you are always responsible. And so it always comes back to this person. And this is why I summarize it and say it's about scapegoating, because it can never be the weather or, this or that or things that you can't be in charge of or be
that you can't be cause over.
That's right.
Because we're supposed to be a cause over everything, basically.
So you indoctrinate 2-year-olds in this, you're setting them up for failure for the rest of their life.
That's
my point.
So I was there.
Yeah.
So I did the whole thing. I graduated in 1986.
What do you think of the whole thing what do you think as you graduated? Were you like, or what was your experience overall after you looking back at it at the time?
It's a twofold thing for me. Number one, I was pretty disappointed in that neither of my parents ever came to the school.
Not once?
No.
Oh, wow. That kind of sucks.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
Actually, I take that back. I take that back. My father, I have to go back a little bit. When I was 14, my parents actually got a divorce. My mother stayed in Maine and my dad moved to LA.
Oh.
So he brought one of my brothers to Delphi and he stayed there for a couple of months. And then he moved down to Los Angeles with my brother.
Okay.
But when I graduated, to answer your question, neither of my parents were there.
Wow.
I felt super alone because after all these years and all this sacrifice to help me get this education, none of you guys are going to show up. I was kind of ticked off. Not gonna lie. I was like, what? But I did it anyway. I went up there and I graduated in cap and gown and all that jazz. And then I returned to Los Angeles. Delphi had a lot. One thing that I was going to mention, I don't know if this would clue in with maybe some of your viewers or listeners. One thing that happened right away when I got to Delphi, I made friends with a bunch of girls, and we were all standing around in the hallway, and they started getting into a little bit of a fight, like a bicker, like just ranting kind of thing. And I said, hey, come on. And the one girl says to me, oh, I just have a really big ARC break, which in Scientology means a break in affinity, reality, or communication.
Yeah,
Meaning
you're
just an
basically upset
upset.
with someone. Yeah.
Yeah. And I said, what do you mean an ARC break? And the girl shifted around to me and said, I thought you were a Scientologist. And because I didn't know the exact definition of that term, that actually spurned me on. I'm like, oh, really? I'm going to become the biggest Scientologist you ever met.
I'll show you.
Unfortunately, that was my response. I'll show you. Oh, okay. But yes, there is this culture up there, and across the country and the world, actually, when you get into these groups, whether it be Delphian schools, all the different missions, etc., but especially the schooling system for young ones, it's quite insidious. You don't see it coming. You don't feel it get inside of you, but it does. It really, really does. By the time I was 13 years old, I was a Dianetics auditor.
Wow. Did you learn that at Delphi?
On the physical property, yes. There was a trailer that was on the property because they didn't teach that stuff inside the school building.
Uh-huh.
A small trailer that was run by one of the staff members, and that's where I did my initial Dianetics training. Prior to that, actually, there was a small mission in Sheridan, Oregon, run by a fellow by the name of Martin Samuel, who became famously declared.
Mm-hmm.
And I did my communications course there before it was shut down or closed, whatever he did with that. But I also was dragged off to Portland to go protest for the Wallersheim case. As a kid,
Really?
I was thrown into a bus. I don't even know what I'm protesting.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. I didn't get shipped down to LA to protest and march around the courthouse when I was in high school. Religious freedom now. Religious freedom now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like,
I had no idea what I was talking about. No idea. Yeah, it was the later stage of that case, in fact.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, funny. Okay, so you go down to LA after you graduate high school.
Mm-hmm.
Your dad's down there. One of your brothers is down there. Which one?
Actually, both of them by that time we were all living together.
Okay.
Again, I had just finished high school. I was 16, and
Right.
we were living in Celebrity Center in Hollywood.
You were living in Celebrity Center?
Yes.
Okay, and this is early. This is what, 84? You said 86. Okay, 80. Right. Okay.
Mid 86. Pre renovations.
Yeah, I'm familiar. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that is
so
funny. I mean, you and I could have walked past each other in the halls.
We probably butted heads. I don't know.
I mean, maybe. That's so funny. That's so funny because I was
running up and down the stairs.
Yeah. It was for the earthquake. Okay. Anyway, please carry on. I'm sorry. I keep interrupting you. Please.
No, that's totally fine. Thank you for placing me. So my father and my two younger brothers, by that time, we were all in Los Angeles. We were living inside Celebrity Center on one of the floors up there. I had a connecting room. My dad lived in the other room, and my two brothers lived in a bunk bed, like up against the wall between the connecting part. And this is all pre-renovation, so it was kind of dumpy, not gonna lie. But the deal was, at least as far as my dad was concerned, now he's back fully involved in Scientology. My mom is not at that time.
Okay.
But he's fully back involved.
Okay, so your mom's out in Maine and she's kind of just off the lines. She still believes in the stuff, but she's not really connected. But your dad is literally living in a Church of Scientology with his kids.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The deal was for me, okay, you got to get a job, which I did. And the rule is, if you want to live here, I'll pay for it, but you have to be on full-time course. Or not, sorry, part-time course. You got to get a job and then go on course at night. That's the deal. And if you don't do that, you're out. So I did that.
Okay. But you had also, at this point, you were hungry for Scientology. You wanted to be the best Scientologist.
Totally. Yeah.
Raw deal for you at the time.
Yeah, I was like, okay, fine.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Good.
Except I don't have a driver's license yet. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll just take the bus to work, which I did. So I ended up hooking up, and my dad did help me. He said, okay, I'll look into some possible jobs for you. And I ended up working as kind of like a secretary / Girl Friday at Mad Hatter Studios, which was at that point owned by Chick Corea. So I worked there.
This is his own personal recording studio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Scientology many years later would buy this property from Chick, and they own it now. But back then, this was Chick's place.
Chick's place, yeah, totally Chick's place. But there was a lot of Scientologists in and out. All my fellow workers were all Scientologists. Yeah. By then, also, I was on training at Celebrity Center, and not too long after that, I got onto the briefing course. The St. Hill Special Briefing Course, a large training course in Scientology.
Now, was the requirement back then that you have prior auditor training as a class auditor, or could you just go right onto it?
You could go right onto it. I think it was the professional training routines, I believe, was a prerequisite. I did that 3 times. Yeah. There was a couple of other ones, but there was nothing. No, you did not have to be fully classified.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was my first real hardcore training.
Yeah, I'll say. I thought I jumped in the deep end. So, okay. So, because there are some prerequisite courses, the and the e-meter and stuff. But these were, I mean, in the 80s, these courses were nothing. They were a few pages of check sheet. It was so much faster to get through them than it is now under Miscavige, who's extended training.
That's insane. Yeah.
It's insane now. In other words, at least you felt like in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, that you were making progress and accomplishing something. Now in Scientology, it literally is just a hamster wheel. You're just going nowhere. Even inside the system, you're not going anywhere.
That's true. But
back then, there was progress and there was status connected with this progress. It meant something to be trained.
Yeah.
It
meant a lot to me. I was very much more into that than any receiving counseling. I was way more about learning and delivering.
Right.
So that was my gig. Somewhere in the interim there, I will say that for a very short time, and I don't think I've told you this, Chris, for a very short time, I was on staff in D.C.
In D.C.?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I know. I move around a lot.
All over the place. I am constantly. You're constantly surprising me with this. Now, what DC? What? Pray tell.
Okay, so when I was 17, I'm living at Celebrity Center, then got that done, and then I did a short stint in Florida, in Clearwater, at Flag, under a group called CIPRO, which is the Scientology International Properties Restoration Organization.
It was. It's not
Yeah.
around anymore.
Keyword was.
This was let me just say real fast. This CIPRA was the original renovations unit of Scientology for restoring its properties.
That's right.
And it was the Sea Org that was doing this. On the land-based properties, CIPRO was where you went or where you were posted as construction or maintenance or engineering or whatever to build and renovate properties. And they were not doing what they're doing now at the level they're doing it now, but they were trying to restore the properties or build up or renovate the properties they did have, like Celebrity Center and Flag out in Florida.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I found out about this little project where you do a work study program for 3 months, which I did. So I flew from LA to Flag, Clearwater. I lived with Sea Org members at the Hacienda Gardens. I lived there.
Wow.
And worked on the cabanas in Flag.
Was that your first time to Flag?
Yes. And my last.
And your last. What'd you think of the place as a teenager doing work study out there in the mid 80s?
Oh, I mean, it was cool. I learned a lot. I learned about framing and tile. But at the time, what was cool about it is that even though I was living with Sea Org members, they had hired a massive amount of non-Scientologists to work on the project because it was pretty big and involved. You couldn't just hire only Sea Org or use only Sea Org members. There was some technical stuff that had to be done that no one was trained for.
That's right.
There was a lot of non-Scientologists involved. So I did that for 3 months, and that was an interesting experience. And I ended up becoming a licensed electrician based on my training there. I came back to Los Angeles, and I actually worked on the Hollywood Guarantee building for about a year as an electrician. And then I helped renovate Celebrity Center as well as an electrician. And that brings me up into my upper teens.
Right. Okay.
So heavily involved also as a volunteer minister, trying to do that and get through this briefing course.
Right. Okay. So now let's go ahead and talk about you as an auditor trainee and auditor as a kid, because there's not tons and tons and tons of people who did get trained as a 12-year-old to sit across from someone and, supposedly become a mental health counselor for them. I mean, this is kind of the equivalent idea of what Dianetics and Scientology are kind of pretending to do. Mm-hmm. What was it like for you being an auditor as a child? You first trained with Dianetics auditing when you were up at Delphi, and then you go down to LA and you get on the biggest course in Scientology, the briefing course. What was this experience like for you, and how did you think of yourself as an auditor?
Well, I guess I could, first off, I just want to say that I love people. I love the idea of helping people. And so anything I read and did, I felt like, oh gosh, I got to get this right, because I believed in the technology, I believed in the material, and I thought if I just get it right, then I'm really going to be able to help someone else. Mm-hmm. As a kid, I didn't think about being a kid, because in Scientology, you're not a kid. Right? So I didn't think about my age. I didn't even think about being a girl. Like, it didn't matter to me. Like, I am an entity gathering information. That's kind of how I thought about it. I'm like, that did not cross my mind.
And yet, okay, so when did you get trained on the use of the e-meter?
The e-meter was later on. That was probably, 89, maybe 90, around there. No, that had to be earlier. So I'm going to say 88 because I graduated the briefing course in 1993, but by then I was also OT4. So I was solo. Sorry to throw the lingo.
No. It's fine. I just kind of, just kind of moving up the training stream here. I guess what I'm wondering about was when you, the briefing course is basically laid out as you're studying everything of Scientology, all the books,
all the red balls.
All the red volumes, right? Yeah, these,
and there's all the tapes.
Yeah, there's a few thousand pages of material there, as well as hundreds of lectures. I think the total is 456 or something.
Yes, I've been there. Done that.
The last part of that course is where you actually sit down and start auditing people, and you audit everything. I mean, you audit grades,
everything, all kinds of stuff,
including security checks.
Yes.
How old were you when you gave your first security check?
I was probably 18 by then.
Okay.
I was probably 18. I may have been. No, delivering a security check was I think I was 18 by then.
Okay.
It could have been 17. I'm not sure.
Fair enough. One of the most controversial things about training children in Scientology is this point of having children or minors, or young adults even, I mean, for that matter, end up at the business side of an e-meter, right? Delivering a Scientology security check to, say significantly older people with much more life experience who might have some rather gory, salacious, horrible things to talk about, and not particularly being in a headspace or experiential place to be able to deal with what's going to come at you. This is a controversial point for sure with children in Scientology, and has been talked about at some length. What do you think about that from your own experience with this? Did you ever feel you were being overwhelmed with stuff that you were not really in a position to be in, or what was your experience with this?
Many times.
Tell me.
And this is prior. So when I was telling you about my experience at Flag working with Cipro, I was also on a work study program. I was doing my HQS, Recovery Qualified Scientologist course at that time.
So you get some more taste of Scientology auditing.
Oh, yeah. And so I was 16, crossing into 17, 16. I was auditing construction workers on the objectives that were not Scientologists. I'm telling people you look at that wall. And I was even though I'm not on the meter, I can't tell you the amount of the comments. And, here I am trying to apply the training routines. I can't even tell you some of the stuff that was said to me, proposed to me, threatened at me. That was not okay.
Wow.
I was in a closed off area. Like, you can't, I'm in session, so you can't come in here. And I'm running the show, and I'm telling this giant dude that is from Milwaukee or whatever, and he's threatening me or coming at me, and I'm using my training to restrain him or get him to just finish the session. Yeah, I mean, that wasn't fun. I wasn't ready for that. Even though I had done you drill this stuff. But there's nothing like when it happens in real life.
That's right. That's right. It's very nerve-wracking.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff happened. Not to mention the things that were said to me. That was only at Flag. But of course, I'm not necessarily running a session when I'm doing training routines at Celebrity Center at 16 years old. I'm not auditing someone. But the bull baiting that happens from grown dudes, I mean, gag.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all part of the process. It's out there. All part of the process of Scientology. Isn't it great stuff, right?
Yeah. It's out there, but I survived.
No, of course, yeah. No, fair enough. Um, Now, there was another thing that happened to you at Celebrity Center that we should probably talk about.
Yeah. So what happened was when I was living with my father and my two younger brothers at Celebrity Center and working at Mad Hatter Studios, there was I had made a couple of friends and they were both Scientologists. They were great people. They have nothing to do with what the bad thing that happened. They don't have anything to do with it. It was just a nice couple of friends, and they said, "Oh, when you get off work, you can come back over here, and I want you to meet this new guy that's in living in Celebrity Center. He's a public Scientologist." And I said, "Okay, yeah, sure, fine, let's go." So I met up with this fellow, and we were all hanging out, watching movies, and just having popcorn. It was very innocent. It's not like a weird party or anything. Then my two friends had to leave to go home. They did not live there. And so they left the room. They said, "Are you good?" And I'm like, "Yeah," because I was literally like two doors down from this guy's place. And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine." So they left the room. And then things got a little weird. And I didn't know this fellow. He was from out of town. He said he was staying there to get some auditing or some kind of service. I don't even know exactly. Um, So, the long and the short of it is that this person who was living at Celebrity Center as a public Scientologist took full and forcible advantage over me, physical,
Okay.
to the point of I begged him not to touch me. I said, "I'm not doing anything with you." That didn't work. He shoved a sock in my throat and covered my mouth and took full advantage
Mm,
for quite a while.
mm.
It was very, very, very scary for me. And at the same time, I'm thinking, confront it. Like, you're trained, confront this. It's a very strange situation when you're that young to try to become a Scientologist or be a Scientologist. And at the same time, you're under the roof of Scientology. Like, I thought I was safe, and I wasn't. Not at all. Not at all. Um, so I kind of like, what is that mechanism where it's like flight or fear or flight?
Fight or flight, sure.
Fight or flight. There was no chance I could fight, even though
Right.
I'm pretty tough.
Well,
I
there's
am pretty tough.
flight, fawn, or freeze, and these
I
words
froze.
change over time, but you basically freezing. Yeah.
Yeah, I went really quickly to freezing. Like,
It's a
just
typical response. Yeah.
get it over with,
Yep.
get this over with so you can live. I was
Yep.
so scared.
Yep.
And I didn't like that feeling at all, of course. Who would?
Right.
But I especially, it it put a dent in my, now looking back, in my trust in Scientology, because A, I couldn't confront him. I couldn't convince him not to do that to me. I couldn't communicate well enough to make it not happen. So, like, wait, is this does this stuff really work? I mean, I never looked at it that way at that time. But that is, now looking back, I was like, wow, it doesn't even work. Like, you didn't listen to me. I didn't have my routine in perfectly.
Yes. You weren't tone 40.
My TR1 was out.
Yeah, exactly.
But so then, okay, so that happened, and it's fine, it's fine. It's not fine, but you get it.
Yes.
But the problem for me, the real problem, was that I had, oh, so fine, I got back to my room and I got dressed and I showered and I went to work the next day. And then I came home from work and I told the ethics officer, I went straight to ethics to tell the gal, and I wish I remembered her name, but I don't. I know what she looks like, but I don't remember her name. But I told her everything that happened, and she locked the door, which was, surprisingly, if I think about it now, that didn't even surprise me. Like, oh, yeah, fine, you're locking the door. But if in retrospect, why do you lock the door on a minor telling you about a rape? That's not okay. So I told her everything that happened, and she said, okay, number one, don't tell anybody. It stays within these walls for now. Okay. Like, not my dad? No, definitely not your dad. Because by then, he was working on getting onto his upper OT levels. So you can't tell him. Can't tell your brothers. That's just going to disrupt their future progress in Scientology. So you can't tell them. Don't tell your friend. We'll call her in, the one that invited me over there. It's not her fault. She had nothing to do with it. So, but I was basically, shut up. Don't say a word. And then after that, I was I was pulled off of studies and put onto ethics handling, which, as you know, means I was sitting there in a room writing down what I did, and then also having to earn the money to pay for auditing to find out what I did in a past life to make this happen.
Dare I ask what she did about him, the man living 2 doors down from you who had raped you at the Scientology Church in now still then and now known as Celebrity Center?
Yes. Here's what I was told. And this is only what I was told by her. Again, I'm working in this little office next to her office to write up everything that's bad about me. And then she came in and I remember she touched me on the shoulder and she goes, guess what? He's gone. And I said, he's gone? Yeah, he's not here anymore. We found out he was dealing drugs out of here. And he's gone. That's all I was told. And I don't even believe it. There was no drugs involved at all. I think it was just they didn't want the liability of my story getting out to anyone, let alone the cops. So that's what I was told. And he was gone. But that's it.
You never saw or heard from this man again for the rest of your life. Is that true?
Correct.
Okay. And we're not dropping names here today or anything like that. But this incident happened, and this was in 1986? 7?
No, it would be 86 or 80, late 85. It would be before I went back to Delphi to graduate. So late, like holidays 85.
Got it. So this is previous to you even graduating from Delphi.
That's
so
right.
You're 15 or 16 years old.
Right.
Okay. And you get put into a room, you get made to write your overts and withholds, is what it's called, right? All your wrongdoings.
Yes.
You get put on an ethics program, and what was it you were supposed to learn or accomplish or achieve from doing this ethics program?
The intent as it was proposed to me, or at least what I understood at the time, was to, number one, lay out anything similar that I had ever done to anyone in my history. which meant nothing because I had never.
You had no prior sexual experiences. Right.
I had one, but it wasn't like that at all.
Right.
So no, but like forced nothing. Like, and it was also like trying to cover like, oh well, did you lead him on? Did you ask for it? Have you ever asked for it before? Have you ever enticed someone before? And then it got earlier, like trying to go into literally past lives. Like, have you ever been a man and raped a woman?
On an OW write-up, they're doing this.
No, that was on a meter check.
Like on a meter thing you got later. Okay, got it. So they put you on the meter and asked you questions as well. Okay.
Yeah.
So all of this is done. Let me ask if the end result of this, or the sort of achievement of this, was you're not telling anybody.
Right.
You're definitely not reporting it to anybody.
Nope.
Not even your parents.
Mm-mm.
Who you are, your father you're living with here, right? And he's gone. Mm-hmm. And we're going to examine in minute micro detail what factors could be making your responsibility in this.
That's exactly right. All of those points.
Right. Which was pretty much exactly almost 20 years later how Danny Masterson's victims were handled in the same building under almost the exact same circumstances. This is called a repeating pattern of behavior. The people who did it 20 years later had nothing to do with what happened to you. They weren't even around. Some of them weren't even born yet. And yet the same pattern of operation continues because this is what destructive cults do.
That's exactly right. It was actually October. I was trying to find the police report that I finally did file, which I did. And I have had an interview online with detectives, which was pretty cool, actually. But it took me until October of 2022. And if you think back to 85, that's a lot of years in between for me to get the courage to even tell the police what happened. And I did not. I told him in my report that I don't expect you to find Rick from Oklahoma. Good luck. Unless you raid Cece and get into their files, because it's somewhere in there. And I know they know about it because I did finally reveal it in session one time in about 2000. It took me that long to even say a word because I didn't want to endanger the cult. Right. I thought, you know what? Swallow it. It happened. Big deal. Put it behind you. Don't endanger the group. And it just makes me sick that I was that fooled. But I did believe that. I did wholeheartedly. Like, as long as I divulge it in session and as long as my ethics officer knows about it, then I'm good. And that guy's going to pull something in, like, you fully justify what's going to happen to him. And don't worry about him. Move on. And it's just not okay. It's just not okay. No. I wish I had ran to the cops or ran to my dad. When I finally did tell one of my brothers, he said, "Oh, it's a good thing Dad passed away because otherwise he'd be in jail."
I can relate.
Yeah, but under the roof of Celebrity Center, that's the part that really irks me. It's not like I was in some random apartment building down the street. It was in my own home, what I considered my safe home. And it wasn't safe at all.
That's right. This was the place which Hubbard described as Scientology, as the most ethical group on the planet.
That's right.
All right. There is nowhere safer you could be if you're a Scientologist. You think there's nowhere in the world you could possibly be safer
It's
than
your
in
record.
the Church of Scientology.
It's like an oasis, like your refuge from the whole outside world. Safe place.
That's right. And it is a church.
Yeah.
That whole building.
I know.
And they treated you like that. It goes so far. Like the emotions of this are just so embroiled and beyond. I can only sort of maintain this tone, you know.
Oh, thank
sort of
you.
thing that, yeah, I am very.
You don't have to feel sorry for me at all, and I know you don't. But I can see you get a little angsty about it, and so do I when I talk about it again. Even though it's been many, many years. And the odd part about it for me, like I said prior, is that I don't want to hunt this guy down.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't. Like, I'm not going to, that's not my thing.
Mm-hmm.
What I am really upset about is the cover up.
Exactly.
The cover up and the gaslighting that happened to me.
Yes.
And probably lots of other people too.
Exactly. There
has to be. I know there's more.
How are we to
have been more with this one dude?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That makes me sick.
Very. Yeah. It's horrifying. Because it's enabling. It's a cult enabling sexual assault of a minor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is more egregious that it is of a minor. This is not, like my blood boils over this stuff. I just really am not into there not being justice for perpetrators of crimes against children. This is a body of people who cannot fight back and have to rely on adult intervention in their lives in order for things to go the way they're supposed to go. And when the adults not only don't intervene, but enable the predation and then make it out to be your fault. I mean, there are just no words for the evil that is. There's just no other word for it but evil.
Yeah, it was a horrific time. And I guess in my own mind, I justified it in terms of, oh, well, they just don't know. Or it wasn't that big a deal. Like you try to make up reasons at that age to like figure out why it's okay that it went down this way when it's really not.
But right.
At the time, I just tried to, and plus, Dad's got enough on his shoulders. He doesn't need to hear about this, like all this stuff.
Wow.
And plus, when you think of like, oh, well, here I am reading these references that might have to do with it. Yeah, maybe it was. Yeah. Like you try to make it your fault. That's how I was. Like you try to figure out how to make it your fault, or at the very least, make it okay not to say a word.
Yeah.
And that's not okay.
No, it's not. It's not. There's no part of that is okay. And unchecked, we see the organization continue to get away with it for decades.
Yeah.
Right? Until this Masterson case. And yet the Masterson trial happens, and yet the Church of Scientology still stands unscathed completely from that legal truth. And we got a lot of work to do on this still.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I will say that the whole exposure regarding that case is one of the reasons I did decide to go ahead and pick up the phone and write an email and do an interview. It gave me strength. So thank you to those ladies.
Big time. Okay, so we've covered that particular incident, and you continued in Scientology, of course.
Oh, yeah.
As a second gen member and as somebody getting trained, and you got the e-meter training, and the auditor training, and you did the briefing course training. Now, this is all back in the 80s. So what happened after all of that? Like, you proceeded forward in what way as a Scientologist after that?
Okay. Well, that section that we spoke of was during the 80s, late 80s. I didn't finish the briefing course until 1993.
Right.
So we're branching into the 90s there.
Yep.
So I was working in the outside world, having fun, building a career. It was actually a lot of fun. Working in Los Angeles. And
what were you doing? Just curious.
Well, after I did that stint at Flag and learned all about these different trades, I became an electrician, and I was working as a professional electrician in Los Angeles. That's where I also helped out, like I said, on the HGB, the Hollywood Guarantee Building, and Celebrity Center. I rewired those places, man.
Wow. And the HGB is the Hollywood Guarantee Building. It's a big 12-story building.
I was there for a year as an electrician.
Wow.
So I did that. And then I got into more residential stuff, electrical work. And I was running crews, and I landed in the film industry of all things.
Well, you were in Hollywood, so.
Yeah, it's not impossible.
Yeah.
I ended up rewiring a large home. It was a giant renovation. 9 months it took us. It was a big one. And so the owner of the home and his wife offered me a job to come work with them in the art department in the film industry. And I was like, okay, that sounds like fun. It was a great combination of creative aspects, building, construction knowledge, mixed with logistics. I thought it was a great matchup. So that's what I ended up doing for many, many years after that.
Nice. And as a Scientologist, after you accomplished this major thing of, finishing the largest course in Scientology as a class 6 in 93, did you go on to do the internship, or did you just do the classwork and the auditing that comes at the end?
Got you. It was interesting when I was on the briefing course, and I can't even recall exactly how it used to be split up. It used to be that you would study a little bit, then audit a little bit, and then study a little bit.
Oh, they reorganized.
And then they switched it over to where all the auditing stuff was at the end.
That's right.
But I was in the middle of the whole thing, so I audited all the way through.
You did the older version, okay.
I guess.
Yeah. Well, that version that I'm less familiar with, I'll put it that way.
That's fine. That's totally fine. So I just audited all the way through, and then they switched over to this other system. But I'm like, whatever. I'm just going to study and audit, and fine. Yep. But I did not do my internship. No.
Okay. So
after that, I focused on trying to get onto OT5.
Right, because I wanted to walk back for a second there. Also, you also did up through OT4. You said, it's not required that you do the OT levels in order to graduate, or do the briefing course. No. You only have to be level, at the level of clear, I guess. But you got onto your OT levels as well. What were your what'd you think of them when you did them? Were you in this whole Scientology? It all makes sense, or was it a little weird for you, or what was your experience of those?
Okay, good question. Well, I will say that almost towards not quite the end of the briefing course, I decided I needed to go do my solo and up through OT3. So I took a little bit of a leave of absence from the briefing course to go across the street.
So I guess you went clear while you were on the briefing course.
Oh, no, I did that way back.
Oh, okay. Prior to the briefing. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. I just really sort of skipped clear. So I was like, oh, when did that happen? Somewhere along the line. Okay.
Oh, man, it's a long story. But
sorry. I totally
I attested to clear when I was 16, 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
One of
Okay.
those.
Okay. Got it. Got it. Okay. So
So
again, you're answering about the OT level. Sorry.
So yeah, so as I'm cruising through the briefing course, I don't know, it's hard to describe, but I got this idea. It's kind of heady. I got this idea like, oh, I think I can read between the lines of some of this information here. And then as soon as I said something to my supervisor at the time, he says, oh, I think you need to go across the street and do your OT levels. Because I must have said something that he clinged on. And so, boom, off I go. So I took a little bit of an LOA from the briefing course and I did my solo course and then all the way through 4 at AOLA in Los Angeles and then returned to the briefing course after that. So I was OT4 by the time I finished in 1993 on the BC. Yeah, I was 4, OT4. After
And
that point,
what thoughts about those OT levels? Any comments about how you
oh gosh,
felt
sure.
about them? Xenu, was that a surprise of any kind, or was that just kind of, oh, okay, whatever? Just
Oh man. Okay. Um, I will say because if I was in like meter mode, because I was already trained on using the meter, like the thought of solo was not a big deal for me. Like,
mhm.
oh, okay, I get it, I get it. Whatever reads is what you pick up. If it doesn't read, you don't pick it up. Like boom, boom, boom. I was very methodical, very technically oriented on that stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, and I will never forget. Nobody can. So you get through your stuff, and then you sit down to read. It's super cool. Like it's almost like fulfilling this fantasy. Ooh, now I have the binder. I'm in the locked room. I've got it locked in the desk. Ooh, it's almost shining. It's like, yes, yes, here we go.
Right.
It's truly like it was for me anyhow. I was like, what? I felt like the pages were gonna glow. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, big time. Like you open it up and I was like, oh, that's his handwriting. That's his handwriting. I know it. Okay. And I start reading and and I kind of like I let I, I didn't see that reaction. I felt like, wait, what? Wait, okay, read it again. Read it again. And the supervisor is standing right there, and there's security, like it's big time security.
Yep.
I just read along, and I went, that's crazy shit right there. But if he said it, I'll check it on the meter. Give me the cans. I'll do it. And that was my thing. I was so dependent on the e-meter being my source of truth. It was so weird because it was odd because actually, even though I was reading it in his own handwriting, it wasn't until I got on the meter that I believed it.
Right.
You see what
Right.
I'm saying?
And you say that is weird. I'm sure it's a weird feeling, but it's not an uncommon one.
Right.
I talked to so many people, even when I was in Scientology, who would tell me, yeah, wild stuff. But I did the meter needs to, but the meter read, so it must be true. And
Right.
and this was their, so even though it seemed like a tall tale to them at the time, they okay,
It reads.
go in session, the needle moves, and so therefore it must be true. None of them realizing that you can make an e-meter read on anything you want.
I know. Well, that was the further along I got on that side of things on the OT levels, I actually started to not believe it at all. At all.
Mm.
It was just more like, okay, I have to go through the motions. But then, when I got into OT4, I thought it was over with the body things on 3. Like I really did believe that. Most people do because that's what
Right.
you're told.
That's right.
Like, that's the end. Okay, you're done with that. So when 4 came around and I realized, oh, wait, more of this, then, mm-mm, mm-mm-mm. Then I started sort of secretly surveying OT5s and even 7s, trying to figure them out. Like, is it more of this? Because if it is, I'm not doing it. And I figured it out. It's more of this.
Right.
I'm not doing it. I don't want to do it. But I couldn't tell anybody that. And I kind of even couldn't tell myself that.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting.
Like, I didn't want to admit to myself, like, oh, that's what this is. I'm not doing it.
Right.
Because I don't believe it. Because it doesn't change anything for me in my life. It looks good on the meter. Here I am expelling beings all over the place. But if I don't feel better, if my life isn't really better, what am I doing? So I don't believe it anymore. And that was really hard to admit to myself after all those years and years and years. And money. Lots of it.
Yeah, because you had to pay for all this stuff.
Heck yeah.
Yep.
So I started to kind of like I was like, okay, maybe I'll just get back into training again. Then I thought, why? Like, if I become Class 8? Well, they don't even offer the Class 8 course anymore. They don't even offer the briefing course anymore.
Nope.
So there was no more training to do. So I was like, okay, well, what am I doing? It was a very difficult, like, dead end. It's kind of like a dead end. Like, you hit the cul-de-sac and spun out.
Right. No, and you're not alone in that. So many people. I mean, I've literally seen the lists. I've called them of people who get up to OT1, OT2, OT3, and then they're just gone.
Yeah.
You just never hear from them or see them again. And sometimes they can get pretty clever about not being tracked down as well. But there's an interesting thing, and I think you just described it very well, right? It's this sort of subtle. This just doesn't work. This just isn't working for me, and being able to acknowledge the reality of that, probably easier to do, I would say, as a public level Scientologist than as a staff or a Sea Org member, where their commitment level and the social pressure can be greater, I think. But that's just me talking out, whatever. I mean, in terms of easy or harder, everybody has their journey. But it seemed like you definitely hit this thing of, it just isn't really doing it for me now.
Yeah, it came to a flat dead end. And I had done like the PDC, Philadelphia Doctor course, 3 times. I did my basics, books and lectures in full.
Right.
Like, I had studied and studied and studied and studied and the, all the tapes and lectures and all that stuff.
Right.
And I still felt like, wait, the answers are not appearing. That I was the prompt, and then you think of the policy: deliver what's promised. Well, it's not delivering. Like, it's not working. Sorry, it's just not.
When did the point come then? I mean, because here you're talking about the basics and stuff. So you basically kind of just meandered on as a Scientologist, but weren't really
just like it's almost like retreading old water, trying to maybe I missed something. Let me do it again.
Exactly. Well, you did have those 900 semicolons that you weren't supposed to have to deal with in Science of Survival. So.
Maybe you just missed something there back in Dianetics or Science of Survival.
Exactly. Well, it was those missing chapters from Dianetics. They didn't.
That's what it was.
Make sense,
That's
right?
why the OT levels don't work.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so basically, we're just making fun of Miscavige right now because he rolls out these solutions in the early 2000s about, oh, well, it was this, it was that, it was the other thing, and it really wasn't any different from Hubbard and his over promising and under delivering. It's like, oh no, I got it now. This is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very underwhelming stuff. It's like, oh, it's the buildings, oh, it's the semicolons, oh, it's the type transcriptionist or whatever.
It's the uniforms we have.
Yeah, it's the uniforms, exactly. None of this stuff is improving Scientology at all because it's all cosmetic nonsense. It doesn't have anything to do with the themes and core of what Scientology is really all about.
Yeah.
So at what point do you go from to, you know what? No, I think I'm done. This is not no. When does that happen?
That was a really rough one for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was a conversation. I guess you could almost call it a borderline intervention
True.
with two of my family members.
Fair enough.
And I have to stick in here. I've been married to a non-Scientologist for almost 30 years, which is breaking all the rules.
That's right.
All the rules.
It's hard to do. It's hard to do because the culture.
Especially because I felt like I was leading separate lives there for quite a while.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah.
Supportive husband. Supportive. He wasn't hostile to science.
Very, very, very. Yes.
He wasn't like, why are you doing that shit?
No. He was paying out the wazoo.
Yeah. He was very, very supportive.
Extremely.
Right,
yes.
But not interested in it.
Right. Just nah.
Yeah.
Whatever makes you happy, makes me happy. Boom.
There you go. So what was that conversation? How did that, let's talk about that a little bit, at least. What happened there?
Okay. So I went to visit a couple of family members a little bit of ways from my home. I took a flight and I was sat down by a family member. That's all I want to say at this point.
Yep.
And he said to me, "What's your stance on Scientology right now?" And I had known him as being very antagonistic in the past. And I thought it was quite an innocent sounding question. But the wall started to come up like, whoa, where are you going? What's going on here? What's your stance on Scientology? And I told him, well, guess what? I am no longer concerned about my eternal freedom. I'm going to be good no matter what. And he's like, really? And when I said that, like my eternal spiritual freedom, I'm not worried about it. And yet I'm not on OT 6 or 7, 8. When I said it, I knew something had shifted for me. Because I should be, according to all that nonsense, I should be very worried about my spiritual freedom. I said, no, I'm not worried about it. He was really. And then he started talking with me about like the scientific approach. And I was like, oh gosh, am I back in school now? But the way he put it to me was so great because he said, well, you should be able to question a theory, right? And he said, yeah. He goes, well, is there anyone anywhere that can question anything in Scientology? I said, no. And then it just kind of like ding. It just like made a little chink. And
Yeah.
but I didn't want to admit to anything yet. I was very spooked. And I said, oh, man, no, but I had to stop myself. I was going to say, because he's always right. But I had to stop myself because I went, and I just started thinking.
Yeah, there it
I
is.
just started thinking about it like, good point, I guess. And then, of course, I thought of all these different disappointments that I had been through personally and had witnessed. And I thought, you know what? Maybe there is something wrong here. Maybe, maybe, huh? It just got me thinking. And within 24 hours, literally 24 hours later, I think it was, yeah, 24 hours later, I just, I let it go. Then I also had a conversation with another family member who worked with L. Ron Hubbard personally. And she told me a couple of things that blew my socks off. And that was it. It was done.
There we go.
Like, it was basically just revealing lies. And it was so hard to accept that L. Ron Hubbard would lie to me. It was hard to accept it. But once I got it, I was like, oh, you know what? We're done.
Right. There's an interesting point along the line when you start really going, once you acknowledge that and start moving down the new path of, well, wait a minute, what was that all about then? That you come to this place of realizing that there were very few times when L. Ron Hubbard wasn't lying to you.
Yeah.
And that is such a
it wipes out all these cajillions of hours of study and intensity and blood, sweat, and tears, literally.
Yeah.
And it wipes it all out. And it's very hard to swallow. For me, it was.
No, I have yet to meet anybody who had an easy journey with that.
Yeah.
It's intense.
Right? Yeah. It's in it, especially being raised with it and then dedicated to it, paid for it, blah, blah, blah. And again, I'm not even close to a Sea Org member. I can't even imagine what that would feel like for a Sea Org member. But for me, I kind of like considered myself as close to a public Sea Org member as you can get, that kind of thing.
Well, you did rub elbows with Sea Org members, and as we'll probably talk about in maybe some future show. I mean, you even got up to gold at some point with your film work and stuff. So you did have a little bit of a peek behind the curtain compared to what other public Scientologists will see and hear.
I would say so. I say that's valid.
Yeah. But that deconversion time is the time of great emotional upheaval and a lot of like cognitive resorting. It's like taking the whole puzzle and
throwing it in the air.
Here's an interesting analogy for you.
Okay.
I just thought of this. Mm-hmm. You take a puzzle and you put it all together wrong. Mm. And you force all the pieces to go together to force something into some semblance of a picture. Mm-hmm. And you stare at it for years, telling yourself it's a perfectly great picture and it makes all kinds of sense. And then when you finally realize I'm looking at gobbledygook nonsense here, this doesn't make any sense, you got to rip it all up and put it back together in a way that does. And that's a recovery.
That is a great analogy because that does very well describe how I felt. Mm-hmm. I literally, once I had this realization that I've been lied to and it's all a fallacy, like really pretty much all, I felt like the floor beneath me disappeared. I felt like I was floating in space uncontrollably. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't even know who I was. Should I believe in anything ever again? I mean, it's just like amazingly powerful.
Yeah.
Very, very powerful.
Rocks your world, as they say.
Oh, yeah. It did that. And I found that education, and so then I got into looking. And we can talk more about this. I don't mean to keep too much of your time, but then I got into looking. Like I wasn't afraid to look.
Yeah.
Anymore. I'm not afraid to read. I'm not afraid to go online. I'm not afraid to talk to SPs. I just became unafraid because, fine, now that that's all gone, I have no floor. I have no truth. Like, I'm going to just go find some new stuff. That's how I felt. Like I felt like almost like I was reborn. It was really a strange feeling mentally.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't afraid anymore. And that's when I reached out to you. That's when I started watching YouTube. That's when I sat down in the middle of the night watching Leah Remini. She was a buddy of mine a little bit. We were pals way back, way back. But in the middle of the night, I'm like cluing up HBO, like, ooh. And I close the blinds. And I hacked my HBO account. Like I was so freaking paranoid.
It's wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
How that manifests for us in different levels and stuff.
Yeah.
I was being followed around, and oh man, yeah.
Reminds me of like one of those movie scenes, like where the helicopter goes over and you're convinced they're surveilling you.
Yep.
It was that nuts. Like, oh, what's that car in the driveway?
That's right. There's all these layers of fear and terror and crap and stuff that you just don't even know it's there until you start trying to deal with it and chink it apart. And then it's
That's right.
where the hell did all this stuff come from, you know?
Exactly. So once you start like carving it apart and it falls down into pieces and you go, that's nothing. That's dust. Like it's nothing. It was all self-created. It's all this fear, this agita is self-created. Right. I think, for me anyway. I got nothing fear.
It's prison of belief.
There you go.
I just think that's the most brilliant 3 words to describe, and that's right. He's the one who came up with that, and that is what this is. It is a prison of belief.
It's totally perfect.
All right. Well, there are a lot more things for us to discuss, no question about it. But we have been talking for a long time today, and I think
I know. I got
the sort of broad.
You have an editing nightmare ahead of you.
Won't be that hard, actually. But I do want to thank you for for doing this and for wanting to do this and for wanting to put your story out there, because not everybody does and not everybody needs to. But if you want to, if it's there and it's something that you think will help other people, and I do think that this will, then it's a good thing to get it out there. So, Julie, I want to thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Chris, for allowing me the space to be with you and speak with you. You've been very helpful for me over these last couple of years, very much so. And again, my intent is it's not fun for me to be on camera. Can't stand it. But if it helps one person, I'm okay with it.
Well, most certainly will. At least that's what my audience keeps telling me, so I believe them.
I believe them too, because it helped me.
Exactly.
I was there too.
Exactly. We're all paying it forward in our own way, I think.
Exactly. That's my intent. That's exactly how I feel about it. Thank you so much, Chris. And yes, if we can continue wherever you want to pick up with stuff, I'd be happy to do it again. You're a wonderful.
Absolutely. Host. We have papers.
I know.
Discuss. So, as my audience knows, I love my papers.
Okay, me too.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Julie. Well, again, thank you again. And I guess I should ask, if people want to reach out to you, do you want them to? Do you want to provide some way of people reaching you?
Oh, that's a good question. Absolutely. Is an email address good?
Absolutely, it is.
Okay. How do I do that?
Well, you can tell me what email address you'd like to use, and I can put it in the show notes.
Okay, good. It's right on 5656@gmail.com.
All right. Well, there you go, folks. And that'll be in the description section to this podcast if you want to reach out to Julie.
Yes.
All right.
And I'm here for anyone.
Okay, good. So on that happy note, we're going to wrap up today. Thanks everybody for sticking around and listening to this whole thing. And I hope that, as always, that this is entertaining, informative, and educational. That's the whole point of this. So I hope that we've accomplished our purpose today. And I will see you guys after my vacation's over now. I'm going to go take some break time now. But thanks for checking in, and I will see you guys soon enough. Bye-bye.